More people than ever are deciding to pack up and leave. For many families, even the cost of putting food on the table week after week has become overwhelming. In one state, the population decline was so significant that it effectively lost the equivalent of an entire city. And surprisingly, this time it wasn't Detroit making the headlines. What we're seeing isn't a temporary fluctuation or a short-lived trend. It's a gradual and unfolding separation from what many once considered the American dream. Today, we're taking a closer look at the 14 states Americans are leaving in the largest numbers. But the story goes much deeper than the headlines most people see. This isn't simply about climate, scenery, or lifestyle preferences. It's about confidence in the future, failing infrastructure, and what happens when the cost of living no longer matches the quality of life people receive in return. Some places have taxes so steep that residents joke they feel more like a form of punishment than a financial obligation. Other cities appear vibrant and thriving at first glance, only for population data to reveal a very different reality beneath the surface. And then there's one state facing an even more alarming problem, where land itself is disappearing and homeowners are watching the ground beneath their properties slowly vanish. Number 14. Hawaii. Hawaii is famous for its breathtaking sunsets, lush tropical scenery, and active volcanoes. But it also has housing prices so extreme that they can make places like Manhattan seem surprisingly affordable by comparison. Here's a statistic that sounds almost unbelievable until you look at the numbers yourself. On the island of Oahu, the median price for a single-family home has climbed beyond $1.1 million. And we're not talking about a luxury beachfront estate with spectacular ocean views and dolphins swimming offshore. We're talking about an ordinary house with four walls and a roof. The financial pressure doesn't stop with housing. Hawaii consistently ranks as the most expensive state in the nation. Overall living expenses sit roughly 88% above the national average. Everyday necessities are significantly more costly as well. Grocery bills run about 51% higher than in most parts of the country, while utility costs are around 71% higher. Even Spam, a food so closely associated with Hawaii that it has become part of the local culture, often costs nearly twice as much as it does on the mainland. You might assume higher wages help offset these expenses, but that's not always the case. Hawaii's economy depends heavily on tourism, and many positions in that sector offer relatively modest pay. The pandemic hit the state's job market especially hard, and while much of the country recovered, Hawaii continued dealing with elevated unemployment rates long afterward. Unfortunately, housing prices never seem to get the message. Public safety concerns have added to the frustration. Honolulu has experienced increases in property-related crimes and drug activity, particularly in areas frequented by tourists. But the real story is something many people overlook. Hawaii isn't emptying out because nobody wants to live there. Quite the opposite. The islands remain highly desirable, which has created a different problem entirely. Affluent buyers from outside the state continue purchasing homes as vacation properties or investment assets. As demand rises, prices climb even higher, pushing longtime residents further out of the market. In some neighborhoods, more than half of the homes remain vacant for most of the year because they're owned by part-time residents. At that point, it starts feeling less like a community and more like a giant real estate investment portfolio. Number 13. Illinois. Illinois isn't facing a population slowdown, it's facing a population exodus. In 2022 alone, more than 104,000 residents left the state. And this wasn't simply a case of people chasing warmer weather or a different lifestyle. For many, it was a decision driven by financial exhaustion and the growing feeling that their location was costing them more than it was giving back. Let's be clear, Illinois is far from an obscure state. It's home to Chicago, one of America's most recognizable cities. It has a rich history, a major economy, and world-famous attractions. But it also carries an enormous pension liability estimated at roughly $140 billion, and many residents feel they're being asked to shoulder the burden. One of the biggest frustrations is property taxes. Illinois consistently ranks among the highest tax states in the nation, with average property tax rates exceeding 2.2% of a home's value. For many homeowners, that translates into well over $6,000 every year, and often much more. Residents frequently ask themselves a simple question: what exactly are they getting in return? The state's financial struggles have become a recurring topic for years. Its credit rating has repeatedly hovered near levels that would be considered highly risky, creating ongoing concerns about long-term fiscal stability. The population decline is especially visible in Cook County, which lost more than 93,000 residents in a single year. At the same time, concerns about crime have remained a major issue. Chicago's homicide rate has consistently drawn national attention, adding another layer of uncertainty for many families considering whether to stay or leave. The economic picture doesn't help much either. Despite being one of the country's largest states, Illinois has struggled to generate strong job growth compared to many of its competitors. While other states have attracted businesses and workers, Illinois has often found itself lagging behind. What visitors don't always see is the difference between experiencing Chicago as a tourist and living there full-time. The skyline, restaurants, cultural landmarks, and waterfront attractions look incredible in photographs. But for many residents, enjoying those experiences regularly has become increasingly difficult as living costs continue to climb. The emotional side of this migration story is often overlooked. Many people leaving Illinois aren't simply relocating from one place to another. They're walking away from neighborhoods where their families have lived for decades. They're leaving behind schools, friendships, traditions, and communities that helped shape their lives. For a growing number of residents, however, remaining in place has become more financially challenging than starting fresh somewhere else. Number 12. Mississippi. Imagine living in a state capital where residents go weeks without reliable access to clean drinking water. That may sound like a crisis unfolding in a developing nation, but it happened in Jackson, Mississippi, during 2022. And for many people, that event exposed a much larger problem that had been building for decades. Mississippi has been losing residents at an alarming pace. Between 2010 and 2020, more than 75,000 people left the state, marking the largest population decline in its history. This isn't primarily a story about people chasing sunny coastlines or high-paying technology careers elsewhere. For many families, it's about reaching a point where everyday life becomes increasingly difficult and opportunities seem harder to find. The state's capital city reflects that struggle. Jackson's population has fallen by more than 10% over the past decade, a sign of the challenges facing both the city and the state as a whole. Mississippi continues to rank among the poorest states in the country, with a poverty rate of roughly 19%. It also consistently appears near the bottom of national rankings in areas such as healthcare, education, and economic opportunity. Financial access is another obstacle. More than 40% of residents are considered unbanked or underbanked, meaning many people lack access to the financial services that much of the country takes for granted. Then there's the infrastructure problem. The widely publicized water crisis in Jackson didn't emerge overnight. It was the result of years of deferred maintenance, aging systems, and long-term underinvestment. By the time the crisis became national news, many of the underlying issues had already existed for decades. The job market presents its own challenges. Employment opportunities are often limited, wages tend to remain relatively low, and economic growth has lagged behind much of the nation for years. Mississippi regularly finds itself near the bottom of major economic rankings. At first glance, some people point to the state's low cost of living as a major advantage. Housing is generally affordable, and many everyday expenses are lower than the national average. But here's the difficult reality. Lower costs don't always translate into a better life. A house may be affordable, but local schools might struggle with staffing shortages. Medical care may exist, but the nearest hospital could be hours away. Savings on housing can quickly feel less meaningful when essential services are difficult to access. Number 11. West Virginia. Since 1950, West Virginia has lost more than 1 million residents. That means the state has shrunk to nearly half of its peak population. And no, this wasn't caused by people suddenly deciding they preferred trendier cities with better coffee shops. The real story is much simpler and much harsher. The jobs disappeared first, and people followed. West Virginia was once the powerhouse of coal country, a state built around mining, manufacturing, and industrial labor. Today, many communities feel frozen in time, like remnants of an earlier American economy that never fully adapted to what came next. The decline has been especially severe in recent years. Between 2010 and 2020, West Virginia's population dropped by about 3.2%, the fastest rate of decline in the nation. The collapse of the coal industry hit the state hard. Then automation reduced even more jobs. And in the vacuum left behind, the opioid crisis spread through communities already struggling with economic decline. The numbers are staggering. More than 60,000 residents were lost over the last decade alone, and even Charleston, the state capital, has seen its population shrink by roughly 10% since 2010. Economically, the state faces major challenges. Workforce participation ranks at the bottom nationally, meaning fewer people are employed or actively participating in the labor market. At the same time, West Virginia has consistently struggled with one of the highest overdose death rates in the country. The job market remains stagnant, and reliable broadband access is still inconsistent in many areas. For younger residents, the pattern has become painfully familiar. Graduate high school, leave the state, and rarely come back. Now, to be fair, the cost of living in West Virginia is relatively low. Housing is affordable and many everyday expenses are cheaper than in most states. But here's the difficult truth. It's also relatively easy and inexpensive to leave, and that's exactly what thousands of people have chosen to do. For many residents, staying can feel like a trade-off between affordability and opportunity. The scenery is stunning, but economic mobility is limited. Communities are tight-knit, but jobs are scarce. Life can feel isolated, especially for younger people trying to build careers or families. This isn't just population decline. It's a generational hollowing out. Entire towns are gradually becoming shadows of what they once were, held together by memories, a few remaining businesses, and whatever local institutions are still standing. Number 10. Alaska. In 2023, Alaska lost more residents than it gained through population growth, employment opportunities, or even the state's famous annual oil dividend payments. And despite what some people might joke, it's not because the moose have taken over. The reality is that living in Alaska demands a level of resilience that many people eventually decide isn't worth the trade-off. Alaska is often portrayed as a land of endless wilderness, breathtaking landscapes, and rugged self-reliance. And to be fair, those things are absolutely real. The problem is that so are the challenges. Between 2016 and 2023, the state experienced 7 consecutive years of net population decline. During that period, more than 25,000 residents left, many of them young adults, skilled workers, and college-educated professionals. Why are people leaving a place with some of the most spectacular scenery on Earth? Because beyond the glaciers, mountains, and picture-perfect hiking trails lies a daily reality that's much harder than most outsiders imagine. Even Anchorage, Alaska's largest city and economic center, has seen its population shrink, losing roughly 12,000 residents since 2013. The cost of living remains one of the biggest obstacles. Alaska consistently ranks among the most expensive states in the country when it comes to basic necessities. Grocery bills often run 40 to 50% higher than the national average. Gasoline prices regularly exceed what many Americans pay elsewhere, and heating costs can become a major burden during the long winters. Healthcare presents another challenge. Specialized medical services are limited in many areas, forcing some residents to travel hundreds or even thousands of miles for treatment. In serious cases, people often fly to Seattle for procedures and care that aren't readily available closer to home. Public safety concerns also play a role. Alaska has consistently ranked among the states with the highest violent crime rates, with domestic violence and sexual assault remaining significant issues. So what does everyday life in Alaska actually feel like? For many residents, it feels beautiful, isolated, expensive, and incredibly far removed from the rest of the country. People often arrive searching for freedom, adventure, and open space. They picture untouched wilderness, quiet landscapes, and a simpler way of life. Then, reality sets in. Everything tends to cost more. Deliveries take longer. Repairs are harder to schedule. Replacing everyday items can become surprisingly expensive. Distances that look manageable on a map often feel enormous in practice. Then there's the climate. Winter darkness can stretch for months in some regions, while summer brings the exact opposite. The roads can be unpredictable, weather conditions change rapidly, and climate change has begun creating entirely new challenges. In some communities, thawing permafrost is destabilizing buildings and threatening the very ground beneath entire villages. Number 9. Oregon. In 2023, Oregon saw more people leave than it gained through births, employment growth, or all the trendy businesses that seem to pop up around Portland. And despite the state's reputation, the explanation goes far beyond cloudy weather and endless rain. For years, Oregon was viewed as one of the most desirable places on the West Coast. It became known for its towering forests, food truck culture, independent bookstores, craft coffee shops, and laid-back lifestyle. But beneath that image, a growing number of residents have become frustrated with issues affecting everyday life. The result has been a steady population decline. In 2023, Oregon lost more than 16,000 residents, marking its second consecutive year of negative population growth. Portland, the state's largest city, experienced some of the most dramatic changes, losing nearly 30,000 residents between 2020 and 2023. Crime has become one of the most discussed concerns. Violent crime in Portland increased significantly between 2019 and 2022, contributing to a growing sense of unease among many residents. Homelessness has also become a major challenge. Oregon ranks among the states with the largest unhoused populations, with more than 18,000 people experiencing homelessness in 2023. The issue is highly visible in many urban areas and has become a central topic in local politics and public debate. At the same time, affordability has become increasingly difficult. Living in Portland now costs substantially more than the national average, with rents hovering around $1,800 per month for many residents. Housing, utilities, insurance, and everyday expenses have all climbed, creating pressure on households across a wide range of income levels. When you combine rising costs, public safety concerns, and growing frustration with local governance, it's easy to understand why some people have decided to leave. Oregon once symbolized artistic expression, outdoor adventure, and a different way of living. For many longtime residents, however, daily life feels less idyllic than it once did. What was once a morning walk through a vibrant neighborhood can now involve navigating visible signs of homelessness, deteriorating public spaces, and concerns about theft or property crime. Paying premium housing costs while dealing with recurring quality-of-life issues has caused many residents to question whether the trade-off is still worth it. And it's important to understand that people aren't leaving solely because of crime statistics. Many say they feel overlooked by policymakers. Others feel burdened by taxes, frustrated by housing costs, or disappointed by what they see as a widening gap between political promises and practical results. The irony is that Oregon remains incredibly beautiful. Number 8. New York. Over a span of just 2 years, more than 800,000 people left New York State. To put that into perspective, that's roughly the population of an entire major city disappearing from the state's resident count. Which raises an obvious question. If New York is one of the most famous places on Earth, why are so many people deciding to leave? From the outside, New York still looks irresistible. It's the home of Broadway, iconic skylines, world-class museums, legendary pizza, and an energy that seems impossible to replicate anywhere else. The city has long sold itself as the place where dreams happen. But for many residents, the reality behind that image has become increasingly difficult to justify. New York is often called the city that never sleeps. These days, some people joke that's because everyone is awake trying to figure out how they're going to pay next month's bills. The numbers tell part of the story. Between 2020 and 2023, New York lost more than 820,000 residents. At the same time, living costs continued climbing to levels that many households simply couldn't sustain. In New York City, overall living expenses sit roughly 137% above the national average. Manhattan remains one of the most expensive places in America, with average rents exceeding $5,200 per month. And what does that kind of money buy? Sometimes it's a modest apartment with limited space, a questionable view, and heating systems that seem to have personalities of their own. The pressure isn't limited to the city either. Upstate homeowners face some of the highest property taxes in the nation, creating financial strain far beyond the boundaries of New York City. Public safety concerns have also become part of the conversation. Following 2020, New York City experienced increases in several categories of crime, including felony assaults that reached levels not seen in many years. For many residents, the equation simply no longer works. People came to New York believing that hard work, ambition, and sacrifice would eventually pay off. Increasingly, however, many are asking whether the rewards still justify the stress, exhaustion, and relentless financial pressure that come with living there. The dream remains powerful, but the price tag attached to it keeps rising. Even outside the city, population loss continues to be a challenge. Communities such as Buffalo, Rochester, and Syracuse have also struggled to retain residents. The issue there isn't necessarily sky-high rent. Instead, it's often a lack of economic momentum, fewer employment opportunities, and the lingering effects of decades of industrial decline. Number 7. Louisiana. In Louisiana, the music often drowns out the warning signs, at least until a storm floods your neighborhood, jobs become harder to find, and your monthly utility bill starts looking bigger than your car payment. Welcome to one of America's most vibrant and culturally influential states, a place known around the world for its food, music, history, and traditions. It's also a state that has been steadily losing residents. And that's what makes Louisiana such a complicated story. Few places can match its cultural impact. The cuisine is legendary. The music has shaped entire genres. The traditions are unlike anything else in the country. Louisiana possesses a character and identity that millions of people admire. The problem is that culture alone can't solve economic challenges, rebuild infrastructure, or protect homes from increasingly powerful storms. When hurricane season arrives, residents know all too well how quickly life can change. The numbers tell a concerning story. Between 2021 and 2023, Louisiana lost more than 43,000 residents. New Orleans, the state's most famous city, remains dramatically smaller than it was before Hurricane Katrina, having lost more than 100,000 residents and never fully recovering its former population. Public safety remains another major concern. Louisiana consistently ranks among the states with the highest violent crime rates, while New Orleans frequently appears near the top of national homicide statistics on a per capita basis. Beyond crime, the state struggles in several key quality-of-life measures. Louisiana ranks near the bottom nationally in infrastructure, healthcare, and education, creating additional challenges for families deciding whether to stay or leave. Financial pressures continue to mount as well. Average household income remains relatively modest, while insurance costs have surged in recent years. As hurricanes become more destructive and climate-related risks increase, many homeowners are seeing dramatic increases in premiums. In some areas, insurance companies have reduced coverage options or exited markets altogether, leaving residents with fewer choices and higher costs. At some point, people stop viewing these issues as part of the state's charm and begin asking whether it's still financially practical to remain. Employment opportunities are another factor. Outside major population centers like Baton Rouge or industries connected to energy production, job growth can be limited. Even in New Orleans, many workers find that wages haven't kept pace with rising housing costs, insurance premiums, and utility expenses. Number 6. California. In just 3 years, California has lost more than 800,000 residents. That's roughly enough people to fill an entirely new mid-sized city, preferably one with fewer wildfires, lower rent, and a bit more breathing room. At first glance, it sounds surprising. After all, California is still one of the most iconic places in the world. It has everything: towering mountains, vast coastlines, ancient redwood forests, world-famous theme parks, and a food culture where even something as simple as avocado toast can feel like a luxury purchase. But beneath the postcard image, reality has been getting harder to ignore. California has recorded 3 consecutive years of population decline since 2020. San Francisco alone has seen an 8% drop in residents over just 2 years. Los Angeles County has lost more than 300,000 people during the same period. And the reasons are rarely simple. Start with cost. California consistently has some of the highest gas prices in the United States, often ranging between $5 and $7 per gallon. Housing is even more extreme, with the statewide median home price hovering around $800,000 and climbing well past $1.3 million in many Bay Area cities. Taxes add another layer of pressure. The state is among the highest taxed in the country, with top income brackets reaching 13.3%. Then come the quality of life challenges that residents talk about every day. Issues like rising theft rates, visible homelessness in many urban areas, and in some regions, populations where a significant share of residents are unhoused. On top of that, rolling blackouts, aging infrastructure, and wildfire seasons that seem to grow more intense each year have all become part of normal life. The emotional reality behind these numbers is what really stands out. Many people didn't leave because they stopped loving California. They left because staying began to feel financially unsustainable, like constantly trying to keep up with a lifestyle that kept getting more expensive no matter how much they earned. It becomes the small things that add up. Paying thousands of dollars each month for a studio apartment where space is so tight that your bathroom door practically bumps into your kitchen appliances. or living with the reality that your power might be shut off during fire season, even while fires are actively burning elsewhere in the state. Number 5. New Jersey. People like to say the grass is always greener on the other side. In New Jersey, that grass often comes with toll booths, traffic jams, high taxes, and a cost of living that can hit your finances harder than you expect. New Jersey has been steadily losing residents for years, and in 2024, that trend continues. Census data shows the state lost over 38,000 people in just 1 year alone. That's roughly the entire population of a city like Atlantic City deciding to leave. So what's driving people away? Let's break it down quickly. First, the cost of living sits about 13% higher than the national average. Then, there are property taxes, consistently the highest in the entire United States. On top of that, housing prices are steep, with median rent in places like Hoboken reaching around $3,200 a month, often for small apartments shared with roommates just to make it manageable. Commutes are another major frustration. New Jersey has some of the longest and most stressful commute times in the country, especially for people traveling into nearby metro areas. Safety concerns also play a role in certain cities. Places like Newark and Camden continue to face higher than average crime rates, particularly in some neighborhoods, which adds to the sense of instability for residents. For many locals, the sentiment is simple. Living in New Jersey can feel like paying New York-level prices without getting the same level of experience or convenience in return. Just the congestion, pressure, and constant rush. Imagine spending over $1,000 a month just to deal with crowded parking lots, constant honking, and long waits for something as simple as a decent bagel. That's the reality some residents describe. Then there's driving. The New Jersey Turnpike has a reputation of its own. For many drivers, it feels less like a highway and more like a constant test of patience and suspension systems. Every stretch of road seems designed to challenge your car's endurance, while lane changes happen aggressively and turn signals sometimes feel optional. Over time, the state's population decline isn't just about migration, it's about exhaustion. People are slowly deciding that the lifestyle simply costs too much in money, time, and energy. The middle class in particular has felt the squeeze. Younger workers are relocating to states with lower costs of living, while retirees are increasingly heading south in search of warmer weather and more affordable housing. Certain cities have been hit especially hard. Newark continues to struggle with affordability pressures and outward migration. Camden still faces long-standing challenges with poverty and crime. Trenton, the state capital, has also seen difficulties retaining young residents and skilled workers. At the same time, rising insurance premiums, utility costs, and transportation expenses are making it harder for many families to justify staying. Interestingly, just across the border in Pennsylvania, many people find lower taxes, larger homes, and more space for the same or even lower cost of living. So the question becomes, is it worth staying for proximity and familiarity, or is it better to leave for financial breathing room? And of course, New Jersey still has its defenders. The food culture is strong, the bagels are iconic, and the local pride runs deep. But even that comes with humor, because when a state calls itself the Garden State while residents are staring at $400 utility bills, the irony isn't lost on anyone. And if New Jersey feels like a financial squeeze, wait until we move on to a state where the landscape itself is becoming part of the problem. Number 4. North Dakota. There are more cows than people in North Dakota, and at this point, even the cows might be checking Zillow listings. This is a state where winters can be extreme. Job opportunities are shrinking outside key industries, and unless you work in energy or agriculture, excitement can sometimes feel like watching snowdrift accumulate in real time. Between 2022 and 2024, North Dakota lost more than 4,000 residents. That might not sound huge until you remember the entire state has fewer than 780,000 people. Proportionally, it's like a small town slowly disappearing. But the bigger issue isn't just population loss, it's momentum, or rather, the lack of it. So what's actually pushing people out? Let's look at the core factors. The cost of living is relatively moderate compared to coastal states, but wages haven't kept pace in many sectors. Outside of the energy industry, job growth has slowed significantly, with thousands of non-oil positions disappearing in recent years. Climate is another major factor. While Alaska often gets the reputation for extreme conditions, North Dakota can be just as unforgiving. Cities like Fargo regularly see more than 50 inches of snow annually, along with temperatures that can drop to minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit during winter cold snaps. Then there's isolation. Large stretches of the state are incredibly sparsely populated. You can drive for hours and see more wildlife than people, which sounds peaceful at first. But for many residents, it eventually starts to feel isolating rather than freeing. Access to services is uneven as well. In larger cities like Fargo or Bismarck, healthcare and education are relatively solid. But outside those hubs, access becomes more limited and inconsistent. North Dakota often falls into what some call the Middle America trap. People move there for affordable housing, quiet living, and a slower pace of life. But over time, some find themselves struggling with limited entertainment options, harsh winters, and a social scene that can feel extremely small. Number 3. Connecticut. If Connecticut were a drink, it would be a strange mix of nostalgia, heavy taxation, and just a hint of quiet financial exhaustion, finished off with a twist of understated frustration. Once upon a time, Connecticut was seen as one of New England's most stable success stories. It had the prestige, the coastal scenery, the Ivy League proximity, and that picture-perfect small-town charm often compared to something out of a television drama. Think polished streets, historic homes, and high-quality pizza. But over the past few years, that image has started to shift. Between 2021 and 2024, the state lost more than 40,000 residents. Many of those leaving weren't just lower-income households, but also high earners and young professionals. That kind of movement signals more than a temporary dip. It suggests a deeper change in how people view long-term life in the state. So what's pushing people out of the nutmeg state? Start with cost. Connecticut consistently ranks among the most expensive states in the country, with living costs roughly 31% above the national average. Everyday life simply costs more across the board, from housing to services. Then there's taxation. Property taxes in particular are among the highest in the United States, ranking third nationwide. For many homeowners, that alone becomes a major financial pressure point year after year. Crime levels aren't the most extreme in the country, but certain cities like Hartford and New Haven still face above-average rates of violent crime compared to national figures, which adds to residents' concerns about safety in specific areas. Housing and real estate present another challenge. The median home price sits above $360,000, and that figure often doesn't reflect the more expensive communities where demand is highest. On the economic side, growth has been uneven. Connecticut has a relatively aging workforce and slower job expansion compared to many neighboring states. Outside of strong sectors like finance and insurance, opportunities can feel limited for younger workers trying to build careers. The result is a state where the lifestyle doesn't always match the cost. You can live in a historic town surrounded by colonial architecture, enjoy scenic coastal drives, and still find yourself facing long commutes of 60 to 90 minutes each way, while paying some of the highest taxes in the country for the privilege. Even daily life on the road reflects the tension. Connecticut drivers have a reputation for intensity. On one hand, you'll see people speeding aggressively in luxury cars through school zones. On the other, you'll find equally determined drivers tailgating with bumper stickers about peace, coexistence, and patience. The contrast creates a uniquely tense driving environment that rarely feels relaxed.